On November 24, 1971, a man in a business suit handed a note to a flight attendant and opened a door at 10,000 feet, then vanished. 50 years later, we still don't know if he survived. What you need to understand about that decision, the one he made when he walked onto Northwest Orient Flight 305 that morning, is that he was betting everything on a calculation. He'd observed the aircraft, he knew the crew rotation. He'd timed the approach into Seattle-Tacoma. What he didn't know yet, whether the FBI would be waiting for him on the ground, whether the cash would be tracked, whether the parachute would open. He was operating on incomplete information, just like everyone else in this story. November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, a Boeing 727 lifted off from Seattle bound for Reno, Nevada, carrying 36 passengers, 6 crew members, and 1 man traveling under the name Dan Cooper. He sat in the rear of the plane 14C dressed in a dark business suit and sunglasses. Unremarkable, forgettable. That was the point. Nobody remembers a man in a suit. Around 2 p.m., he pressed the call button. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner responded. He opened a briefcase. Inside, a revolver. He'd made his demand clear in a note, and now he showed her the weapon to prove he wasn't bluffing. $200,000 in cash, unmarked bills, small denominations. He wanted a parachute too, 4 of them. He was specific. He'd thought this through. Here's where the pressure began to split decisions. Captain William Scott faced a choice: treat this as a genuine threat or assume it's a prank. In 1971, airplane hijackings weren't rare. They happened regularly, but this one felt different. The man was calm, professional. He wasn't making wild demands or threats against passengers. He wanted money and a way out. Scott made the call to negotiate, to buy time, to land the plane safely. Planes circled Puget Sound for 2 hours. Below, FBI agents mobilized. Police cordoned off Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Bank officials scrambled to assemble the ransom, $200,000, and used 20s and 50s, each bill photographed and recorded. They didn't know yet whether they were dealing with a genuine threat or a bluff. The man hadn't hurt anyone, he hadn't even fired the gun. But the gun was real, and that's all that mattered. At 5:24 p.m., the plane touched down. Ground personnel pushed a stairway to the rear door. The money was loaded, then the parachutes. Cooper had the passengers and most of the crew moved to the forward cabin. He kept 2 flight attendants and the pilots. He was isolating himself with people he could control. Another calculation made under pressure with imperfect knowledge of what would happen next. He released the passengers in exchange for the money and parachutes. 36 people walked off that plane. Now he was alone with a skeleton crew and a $200,000 problem: how to disappear. The plane remained on the tarmac, engines running, doors sealed except for the rear stairs. The FBI agents positioned around the perimeter had no shot. They couldn't see him. They couldn't move without risking lives, so they waited. At 8:00 p.m., he ordered the plane back into the air. Destination, Mexico City, low speed, landing gear down, flaps lowered to 15 degrees. He knew aeronautics, he knew aircraft. The pilots realized he wasn't just making demands, he understood what he was asking for. This wasn't amateur hour. This was someone who'd studied the mechanics, the payload, the geometry of escape. Somewhere over southwestern Washington, around 8:00 p.m. The exact time is unclear because the cockpit clock disagreed with ground records. Cooper lowered the rear stairs. The cabin pressure changed. The noise became deafening. What he did next exists only in testimony. He attached the parachute, held the money, and jumped into the darkness over a landscape he couldn't see. 50 years later, nobody knows if he was alive when he hit the ground. The pilots didn't see him go. They didn't know the exact moment he left. The FBI agents on the ground had no visual confirmation. For days, weeks, months afterward, investigators pieced together a timeline from radar blips, fuel calculations, and witness statements, all of it approximate. All of it filtered through what people remembered or thought they saw. The gap between what happened and what anyone knew about it was enormous. The plane landed in Reno. Cooper was gone. The money was gone. But here's the problem with disappearing: you can't spend cash that's recorded. Every serial number was photographed, every denomination logged. The FBI distributed those numbers to banks across America. If Cooper tried to use that money, they'd know. They were waiting for him to make a mistake. For years, nothing, no sightings, no confirmed money, just silence and speculation. In 1980, a child found $5,800 of the ransom buried along the Columbia River, but that raised more questions than it answered. How did it get there? Did Cooper bury it? Did he survive the jump? Did he die in the forest? The money was a clue, but it didn't solve the puzzle, it complicated it. The FBI pursued leads for decades. Hundreds of suspects emerged. Some confessed, some had circumstantial connections. Robert Rackstraw, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., Dan Cooper himself remained a ghost. No confirmed identity, no confirmed fate. The Bureau eventually closed the case in 2016, though unofficially the file never really closed. Some mysteries don't get solved, they just run out of living witnesses. What made Cooper different from other hijackers was the calculation. He didn't want to negotiate politics, didn't want to hurt anyone, didn't want attention beyond what was necessary. He wanted money and an exit strategy. He researched the aircraft, he understood the parachute, he knew the geography, he made decisions based on information he'd gathered, and he accepted the costs of what he didn't know. That's the mind of a strategist operating under pressure. But here's the hard truth. Even perfect planning fails against uncertainty. Cooper either survived the jump and lived the rest of his life under an assumed identity, spending money carefully or not spending it at all, or he died in the dark over a forest he'd never seen. Both outcomes were possible. Both fit the evidence. Neither can be proven. That's what makes this case endure. It's not a mystery with a solution. It's a decision made under pressure, whose consequences we'll never fully know. 50 years on, D.B. Cooper remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. No confirmed identity, no confirmed fate, no confirmed resolution. He cost Northwest Orient Airlines $200,000 and forced a complete redesign of aircraft security. He changed how we fly. He changed how we think about risk and calculation under pressure. And he did it all while remaining a shadow. The question that haunts this case isn't who was he, it's what did he know that made him confident enough to jump into darkness. That gap between knowledge and action, between what he'd calculated and what actually happened, that's the real mystery. And it's why this case will never truly close. Subscribe. Every week we examine a decision made under pressure that changed history and the unsolved questions it left behind.